Well, thanks, Senator Ron, for agreeing to talk about a story that I broke last week. I got public records. For people who haven't read the story yet, I got some public records back that showed that a former federal agency regional manager was emailing the Attorney General's office about the whole debate over child daycare fraud. And he said in the email that child care fraud is common, and I just thought that that was a very interesting admission. And I reached out to him for comment, didn't hear from him because I was interested in, figuring out what the scope of that was. But I'm curious what you think about this, Senator Braun, to have a former federal agency regional manager say that this is something that's common, when the rhetoric from a lot of state officials is that, it's not happening unless you prove it.
Yeah, it is. On one hand, it's kind of stunning that they would say that, but on the other hand, it's not really that surprising. And look, this whole thing with childcare fraud became a hot issue a few months ago, especially that folks were focused on Minnesota. But we have had uh, complaints from inside the agencies. First, was originally with DSHS, and then with the invention of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families some years ago. It moved there, but we've had folks inside the agency tell us that they have concerns about fraud. This is no new issue. It's things that we push forward. Time tracking programs, other audits have been suggested for years, and the Democratic majority has sort of pushed it aside. I mean, I don't, and I don't have any special knowledge. I can't say definitively it's fraud's there or not fraud, but we certainly have credible uh, claims that is occurring, and it makes sense to me that we investigate these regardless. If there is fraud, there should be consequences. If there's not fraud, the public deserves to know at this point that their taxpayer money is being spent reasonably and responsibly. Either way, it deserves investigation, and this just adds fuel to the fire that the Democratic majority shouldn't be sitting on their hands doing nothing about this. It deserves attention. It deserves attention now.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting was that his email was in response to Attorney General Nick Brown's press release statement, I believe on the 30th of December, where he was telling people to not harass these home-based daycare centers, and that people should report
Yeah.
harassment or bias incident hotline. And what was fascinating is the man emailing this person at the Attorney General's office. He noted that press release statement, but he doesn't say anything about the fact that this shouldn't be, that it's not going on. He said, it's so funny. He said it's common and it's not confined to just Somalians. It's confined to other groups of people as well. It's not just one group. So I just thought that that was interesting, where he goes, don't get the impression that it's just them, it's other people. And it just raises questions of, what did the Attorney General's office do with that? What did that individual do with that email and that information? Like, oh, have you contacted DCYF? Which is interesting also, because when reporters during the legislative session brought up questions about DCYF's childcare subsidies, with both, I think it was the state auditor, but as well as state lawmakers, a lot of them were immediately just said, "Well, did you report it? Did you report the fraud?" As if that's the job of reporters to report fraud, as opposed to just looking into whether this is going on. But almost, you think that that would inspire, if there was even suspicion, you would be wanting to investigate it. But it's almost trying to say the burden of proof that there's fraud is on someone else. But you don't wait until there's proof before you do an investigation, right?
And yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, you have credible reports of potential for fraudulent activity. It deserves investigation, and sadly, the response we too often got from the Democratic majority was, name calling. How could claiming this was focused on a particular ethnic group or which is not true. The question is, do we have fraud in our childcare system? And if we do, we need to do whatever we can to get rid of it. This is an important service to many people around our state, and they just seem, you know, okay with the potential for fraudulent activity. It needs to be investigated. It needs to be done so transparently, so the people of the state of Washington see that these concerns are being taken seriously. And whatever the outcome, people need to trust that state government did their job and made sure that they're delivering the service, and they're delivering the service without undue expense, without fraudulent activity, without misbehavior. These are all very, very reasonable demands from the people of the state of Washington, and yet the Democratic majority seems to want to look the other way.
Yeah, but the other thing that's interesting is the the head of DCYF, Tana Sen, has been, I think, for a lack of a better word, she doesn't get out much. And so, I saw that she was at a recent event with Governor Ferguson, but I'm just curious where, we've tried to get an interview with her. We've tried to talk to DCYF about stuff, and reached out to them over this most recent story. You'd think that there would be, she would come out and say, there's these allegations, we're going to look into it, and we'll let the public know what we find. And I know that the state auditor did an audit of DCYF, and they didn't find fraud. I think they found overpayments.
Yeah.
Which still just raises this question of, okay, you're seeing that these safeguards are in place to prevent fraud. There's this internal audits and all this kind of stuff going on. So how are they getting around that?
Yeah. So a couple things. One, when it comes to the secretary, Tana Send, I mean, I last saw her, I think, in December. She certainly hasn't, everybody has a different leadership style, I suppose, but she certainly hasn't been out in front and trying to working to give the people of the state of Washington confidence that the department is taking this seriously and getting after it. And then the audit you mentioned, it's a normal statewide audit. It includes DCYF and other agencies. And what they found, I think, was again shocking. I mean, they in a small audit, or actually it was a review of an audit done by the internal auditors in DCYF, which, by the way, there's only 6 of them, and this is an agency that has hundreds of people in it and spends billions of dollars. In a small audit of about $10 million worth of payments, they found $2 million in overpayments, and that could be an administrative error, it could be an oversight, but also could be fraudulent activity. 20% error rate. Yeah, that's a big error rate, and it certainly deserves more attention than it seems to be getting. Certainly, there's no public sharing of follow-up steps by either the agency or the administration.
Yeah, the other thing I find interesting is that this is going on. I think I can't remember exactly which agency, but the state has been closing some campsites and recreational sites due to spending cuts, and the state's got a bit of a fiscal problem right now, and they had to dip into the budget stabilization account. They went into the public works assistance account to get money for the operating budget. You would think that they would be wanting to jump on any alleged fraud as not want to say pretext, but just say, oh, if there's fraud, great, that's going to save us money if we stop it. And then
Yeah, this.
we don't have to worry about cutting spending, and we don't have to worry about upsetting some constituents or groups that are getting money. The people that we're taking money from are doing it illegally, and so and then you go after them, and then other people stop, out of fear of going to jail, don't commit fraud, and now you're cutting spending without actually losing services.
Yeah, there's been no consequences for this stuff, not even an understanding, and yeah, I mean, it feels bad continually picking on Department of Children, Youth, and Families, but look, this is the same agency. We got $500 million of
Right.
tort liability. Most of it's coming from this agency. We have credible reports of fraudulent activity. We have a state audit that says we're overpaying 20% of our bills within the audit scope. These are very alarming issues, and as you say, this is all in the context of huge budget deficits where they're making very, in some cases, draconian cuts to services that citizens of our state value, and yet seem unwilling, or at least unwilling in a transparent public way, to say, we're going to look into this, we're going to get to the bottom of this, we're going to make sure that we're spending this money reasonably and well.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think's going to happen moving forward? Because an important thing to keep in mind is that also involves federal tax dollars, and so the federal agencies could weigh in as well. What was interesting is the guy who wrote the email to the Attorney General's office, the former agency regional manager, was discussing. He was with the Office of Childcare, and he was noting how there had been a bunch of layoffs with the office. I think the office in Seattle that he was working out of got closed because of the budget cuts. But it was something that they would have potentially investigated. I don't know if with DCYF, but at, because it involves federal money, at some point the feds could start investigating. And then it just raises questions of, well, how big of a problem this is. And more importantly, how did anyone in DCYF know this was going on and just didn't say anything, or were they just completely in the dark? I mean, these are all the questions that would be answered if the secretary got up and said, you know what, we're going to do an internal investigation, and we're going to find out what's going on, and then we're going to release our findings, and that way they can figure out if, at the very least, they could come out and say, you know what, we looked into it, here's what we found, we didn't see anything. Or they come out and say, we've discovered this fraud and we've put a stop to it, but nobody was involved. The fact that there's no investigation going on, it just leaves it up in the air to where people can speculate as far as they want as to how pervasive this is, but also how complicit potentially state employees are with this kind of fraud going on.
This is what you get with 40 plus years of single party rule. They feel no, pressure to do exactly what you're saying. These aren't hard things that you're suggesting. Given the scale of the problem, that they do, they do follow up investigations. They make those follow up investigations public so that the people of the state of Washington understand that they're doing the best to safeguard the use of state money. Instead, they feel empowered to just, keep their head down. They feel comfortable that the broader media, and by the way, thank you for following on the story, won't cover it, and therefore the people of the state of Washington won't know about it, and they'll just keep letting them do whatever they want. I mean, there's a certain amount of elitism and arrogance that these pedestrian matters like potential fraud and the waste of potentially hundreds of millions of dollars don't affect us. That's what I think I hear from people. People are deeply frustrated, I would say even angry, that they see credible reports that this type of activity is going on, and frankly they feel the fool because they get up every day, they go to work, they provide for their families, they do the right thing for the communities, and they see people out there potentially, and I want to warrant that hasn't been investigated, so we can't say there's true fraud, but certainly there's credible indications, and they're mad about it. They're really frustrated about it, and kind of the arrogance of the folks in power to, yeah, whatever. It's just not right.